Well, hello there. It is great to see you again, and welcome back to the latest installment of Path to Abundant Living. I'm your host and moderator, Ryan Ruff. We've got the stars of our show in Mr. Matt Nordmann and Scott Morrison of Morrison Nordmann Associates. They'll be joining me momentarily for another wealth management related discussion. But look, first and foremost, I want to kind of set the scene as to what it is that we're going to be diving into today. Obviously, if you're a frequent listener of our show, we cover a different wealth management related strategy. These are the tips and the tricks, as well as the conversations that Matt and Scott are having with their clients on a regular basis. We want to bring them here to you in this show so that you can benefit from some of the information as well and help put you on that same path to abundant living. Today, what we're diving into is this idea of, hey, it's time to review that trust. With just so many changes going on in our world, both socioeconomically, politically, just so many changes out there. Maybe your family already has a trust in place. Well, maybe it is time to review that trust to make sure that your current goals and aspirations, and maybe they've even shifted over the last few years, are still in line with what your current trust has already sized up. So today what we're going to be doing is examining a few different tips and strategies on how to size up the current status of your trust and then determine whether that's still on track to meet those goals and needs for your financial portfolio. So that being said, let's go ahead and bring the guys out to get today's conversation rocking and rolling. Scott, Matt, good to see you guys. How are we doing this morning?
Great to see you, Ryan. Doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, can't complain at all. Excited that you guys are aboard with us. I'll tell you what. Let's dive in, and I think as usual, our best way to get things going is kind of with a little bit more of a high level conversation to kind of ease our way into things. Scott, I'll throw this first one over to you. Many people tend to set up trusts for themselves or their families. But you say that setting up a trust and just getting it going isn't the only step, correct? There's more to it than just that, right?
Yes, Ryan, there's a good chance that you have one or more trusts already set up. And of course, if you don't, you may choose to do so at some point in the near future. And of course, there's many available trust options out there, from charitable trusts to marital trusts, which means you could identify with at least one of them that makes sense for your particular financial situation. But here's the thing, if you haven't reviewed your trust recently and assessed whether you're still on track to deliver the results that you want, then you could be putting some of those future financial plans at risk.
Sure, guys. So Matt, why might a trust that you have in place no longer be positioned to do what it is that you want it to do?
You said it in the intro, Ryan. One word: change. Whether it's change in tax laws, change in the financial markets, change in your life. If you think about your own life, has anything changed in the last 5 years? And some people might say, "Oh, nothing's changed in my life." Well, there are other areas that can possibly change that would affect the plans that you have in place. And so you want to be careful and make sure that what you put in place that is ideally positioned for you. And so you think back to 2017, there were major tax law changes that went into place. And so even if you set up your trust even just a few years ago, it's worth reviewing. And if it's been 5 or 10 years, it's definitely time to review.
Sure thing. So guys, given this idea that it is time to review, it's really the theme of our show today. Scott, take us through this. Where do we start with this process if we want to review, make sure that our existing trust is up to snuff?
Well, there tends to be some mistakes and issues that come up more frequently than others, of course. So, before you go looking for the weird and the obscure one-off situations, make sure you have the basics covered first. For example, if you have a living trust or a revocable trust, we're going to recommend that you focus, first on those things that have the biggest impact, and make sure that they're set up the way that you want them to be. Most people name themselves as trustee of their revocable trust and their spouse as a co-trustee. That's very common and makes a lot of sense, right? However, it can be tricky when you start to name successor trustees and you don't review those decisions periodically. With time comes older children, older heirs, changes in their life. So oftentimes we don't typically think beyond our spouse as the co-trustee And so, it's a heavy responsibility to be a successor trustee, and you need to make sure you've selected them properly. I guess the worst example would be, for example, if one of the trustees, slipped into an alcoholism problem or a divorce situation, and so you need to ask yourself whether or not they're still in the proper frame of mind to be a trustee. So we also want to make sure that you review the successor steps in their roles. I mean, what are going to be the triggers by which they become a trustee? Is it going to be when you and your spouse can't act as the trustee yourself, or is it going to be when you die or incapacitated? You need to have a really good understanding of what are the triggers that put that responsibility on the successor trustee. And then I think there's always that question about how well your trust protects you from lawsuits, divorce, and other problems. Is your trust is it set up to protect your children and your grandchildren from creditors and divorces as well? Because if the trust was set up prior to them being engaged or married, there's probably a new variable in there that you hadn't accounted for when you first did the trust. So you need to answer, whether those things are still taken care of in your trust, or whether or not it needs to be amended.
Roger that, Scott. And Matt, do you have anything to maybe add on to that? Any other areas maybe that a trust, as they should be looking at their trust, that people maybe often overlook, on areas of the trust that need to be updated as their lives change? Any other thoughts on that?
Oh, definitely. One of the biggest areas that you see is when and at what age will your heirs receive the assets from your trust. And so, for example, it's like, okay, maybe you set up a trust, you start to have kids, and it's like, oh, we need to set up a trust. And you had said, well, what is the benchmark age for when they would receive those assets? Maybe it's 21 or 25 years of age. Well, if they're still younger than that, kind of what's the path that they're on? So maybe it's, unfortunately, which we see is maybe your heirs are having, maybe it's some issues with drugs or alcohol, or maybe kind of heading down that path where if they were to receive those assets, it could make things even worse. Or conversely, what if, they're showing some really good financial savvy and some knowledge, and maybe the assets, if they were to receive them earlier, they could really help jumpstart them along that path. And so, for example, personally, we set up our trust for our kids. We have 2 kids, and they're 18 and 22. And initially it was, okay, here at 25, you'll get 20% of the assets if something were to happen to myself and my wife. And then at 30% more. And then once they're age 35, again, with some other caveats in there. Well, again, if your kids are younger than that, or maybe things have changed in your life or changed in their lives, and so you really want to make sure that you've looked at when the assets, whether it's your kids or your grandkids, and kind of what it is that you want to achieve, to make sure that they are prepared for it when the time comes.
No, it makes total sense, Matt. So, guys, we've hit a handful of different considerations for that somebody should be thinking about when they're going through reviewing their trust, making sure that it is still up to date. Let's talk about a mistake here, Scott. Do you guys ever find that there's maybe one really big mistake that you see people overlooking or making really with the trust that they have?
We do, and it's one that it's really weird that when you think about how much effort it takes to sit down with an attorney and really hammer out all of the things that you'd like to be part of a trust. And so obviously that process can be something that is very taxing, both emotionally and just from a time element. But far too often the trusts that are set up are never actually funded. And so it means that once that trust is in place, you actually need to go through the tedious process of the paperwork and the retitling and the beneficiary change forms to actually fund that trust. For example, if you have a home and you don't name the trust as the owner, then the home is not funding the trust. If you have a joint investment with your spouse where there was named beneficiaries, for example, well, those that trust or that joint account is no longer is accurately descriptive in terms of what you want to have happen in terms of the heirs receiving those assets. And that's why you went through the process of creating the trust in the first place. So you're going to need to probably change the registration of that joint account to a trust account. So it's really that, making sure that once you have the trust in place, that you're funding it and retitling the things as you need to. Any review should also answer the question, is my trust properly funded, and has evidence that you've done that. So if I were sitting down with a client or with an attorney and they say, yes, my trust is funded properly, you'd want to really make sure you see the documentation that kind of proves that, because otherwise, it's a trust document that doesn't really have any legs. So you want to make sure that you go through that process. It's a simple process to fix once you've identified some of those things, but it's really crucial in making sure that the trust does what you want it to do.
Yeah, and it comes back to that idea of just knowing is half the battle, asking the right questions, making sure you're on top of your stuff, and having the right conversations. Speaking of which, Matt, once you've done this review of your trust and you've got an idea that these basic issues are buttoned up and taken care of, are you good to go? Or is there a next step, a deeper level that you need to dive into to make sure things are really where you want them to be? How does that work?
We believe the answer is yes, definitely. What happens is you kind of dig into those trust documents, and that's one part of your overall plan, your wealth plan and strategy. And what we would say is the next step is to do a stress test. It's playing that what if game of looking at all the areas, not only your trust, but what about your assets and the way that they're positioned and different things. And there's, when you're playing, it's not playing, it's your life. So when you're looking at and running the stress test to say, okay, is everything that we have put in place going to achieve all that's most important to us? And so there's two main areas that we look at, that you look at: opportunities and threats. And so opportunities might be, okay, we have these assets positioned, so some financial assets are positioned in a certain way, but you know what, by looking at them and diving deep, like you were talking about, Ryan, once you dive deeper, it's like, you know what, if we reposition a few of these assets, we could possibly get a better return without taking any significant risk. And maybe that's going to achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve. Or maybe there's some tax harvesting that can help you financially and save you thousands and thousands of dollars. Now, on the flip side, when you look at threats, which again, it's not common, but maybe there was something that was put in place years ago that, it has now turned into a threat based on tax law changes or changes in your life or politically or whatever the case may be, that, this could blow up and it could severely harm your future and your family's future and all the plans that you have put in place. So you want to really dive deep in all the different areas associated with your plan and take a really hard look at it.
Roger that. And guys, for our audience's benefit, the stress test, I mean, this is something that we have hammered home on episodes prior. In fact, we did a whole overview. I want to say it may have even been our inaugural episode on this show, was a deep dive on what the stress test is, the different angles to approach it, how it can be used for everybody. So if this concept that Matt's bringing up about a stress test is a little new to you, then I'd recommend circling back, checking out, it might be our inaugural episode where we do that stress testing overview as to what all goes into that process, because I hear you, Matt. Yes, that can be a beneficial stepping stone in this process. But let's now tie the two together. Scott, hypothetically, what might a stress test uncover or reveal about someone's trust when looking at it through this lens?
Well, the trust, the stress test can obviously make a good trust even better by, let's say the example would be, let's say you purchased 2 homes in other states from the last time that you actually had created your trust or had it amended. By tying the 2 new residences into the trust, you might be able to avoid, let's say, 2 different rounds of probate and the excessive costs, of course, that would be associated with probate. If you didn't tie those 2 residences into your trust, you or your heirs could find yourself being probated in 3 different states down the road. So it's just one of those kind of, and I can speak to that myself. We recently purchased a vacation home that, it wasn't part of the trust to begin with. So it made it necessary. It was a trigger for us to revisit what the trust is, what the trust document has, and making sure the ownership is the way we want it to be. From another personal experience, I think that the one thing that a stress test will uncover the most, at least from what I've seen from my experience, is when some of the older trusts don't have what's called a see-through provision. And I'll give you an example where if you have an IRA and you've named your trust as the primary beneficiary, well, the trustee is bound to exercise what, as the executor, exercise what the trust is telling it to do. And if the trust says, hey, it has to be spilled out to the heirs, well, what you might be, without that see-through provision, what you might be keeping that beneficiary from being able to do is maintain the tax deferral of that IRA. If they have to cash it in, it might be causing a sizable taxable event, and means they're forfeiting the option to inherit the IRA as it is, and future tax deferral as a result. So just having something like that see-through provision added, amended, is something that I see routinely as we review older trusts. A simple stress test would reveal that very easily, because you'd simply say, well, what would happen in the event of a death? Here's what the trust currently says. Is this what your heirs would want? And of course, the answer oftentimes is no.
Sure. And Scott, I appreciate you sharing some of your personal experiences with that. It's always helpful, anytime we're able to dive into our own personal experiences with things. But real quick question for you guys then, and this is kind of circling back to just conversations that we've had on prior episodes, is this idea that you and your team over at Morrison Nordmann Associates, you guys work with a network of professionals, to tax attorneys, to, property and casualty insurance specialists, all these different people that you have within your network, so that you can provide, the best services you can for your clients. That being said, I would imagine this process is something that would also be done, hand in hand with another professional. Could you maybe am I correct in saying that, going through the trust in this process, Matt, would you work alongside, another team of professionals?
Yes, Ryan, definitely. And so if you have that team in place, that expert team that are really knowledgeable and technically sound with everything that they recommend, whether it's for you or other clients or whatever, definitely. And so you want to work with an expert team, with the financial advisor, the estate and trust planning attorney, like you had said, the PNC agency, an accountant, all the different areas that will affect your life, and make sure that they are experts in their area and really knowledgeable. But that's just one side of it. The other side is you want them to understand you and what it is that you and your family are trying to achieve. And then marry the two of those together, because you get to decide, do you want a kind of a simple canned approach to it, where it's this boilerplate, fill in the blank, or would you rather have a customized, comprehensive plan from all those professionals that are those high-level trusted advisor experts that know you and what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then bring those together to benefit you and your family.
Fantastic, guys. Hey, we've thrown a lot of information at our audience today in terms of reviewing that trust they may already have set up. For anybody out there that, this conversation's really resonating with them, and maybe they're interested in chatting with you or somebody at your team or on your team a little further about it, just as to how, their own trust that they've got set up might benefit from putting it under, a microscope with you and your team. How should they best go about reaching out to you guys to get that, that conversation started and get that ball rolling?
It's a great question, Ryan. I'll field this one, Scott.
All right.
So the quote unquote traditional or old school way, pick up the phone and call our office 517-333-7967. Or if you go to our website, morrisonnordmann.com. On there, you can click on a link that will, I request more information, and sends an email to us, and then we'll reach out to you and find out how it is that we can help.
Awesome. Well, guys, hey, I appreciate you carving some time out of your day to be with us on the show, to dive into this idea of reviewing the trust. And I know we've got some great conversations dialed up for some episodes to come, and I'm looking forward to having you guys back on and getting into those soon.
Looking forward to it, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan.
Alrighty, guys. Well, hey, thanks again. And look, we want to take one final moment, as always. Thank you, our audience, for jumping aboard and being with us on the conversation today. If you liked what you saw, you liked what you heard, maybe you benefited from some of the conversation today, do us a favor, comment on the show, subscribe to it on whichever platform you're checking us out on, and then share this information, right? With friends, family, business owners, anybody that you think would benefit from these types of conversations. At the end of the day, we're ultimately just bringing these same strategies, tips, solutions, conversations that Matt and Scott are having with their team in the office of Morrison Nordmann Associates right here onto this show. We're having those same conversations, and we've got some great topics queued up for future episodes to come, and we'd hate to have you miss out on any of those potentially beneficial conversations that could put you and yours on that path to abundant living. So for Matt and Scott, I'm Ryan Ruff. We'll go ahead and say so long today, but we appreciate you one last time for being with us on today's installment of Path to Abundant Living.